Thank you very much. I want to apologize for the late start. Of course, this is a technology institution and we have tech difficulties, because that's the way it goes. My name is Shyla Esprit. I am a lecturer in literature and English at the University of the West Indies, Mona, and the coordinator for the Writing, Literature and Publishing program. I am also the founder and director of Great Caribbean Research Institute, the first digital humanities center in the Caribbean. And this is our first public event in collaboration with the Literature and English Department. This is our first public event to recognize that Great Caribbean is 10 years old. This is no small feat. And I am happy to have so many people on the Zoom with us and in person. My students are here to hear about the work of Great Caribbean and to also talk about making sure we can have another 10 years or something like that. Maybe not with me in the front, but one of the young people in the room also. But yeah, I am happy to have this conversation today. And I will begin by sharing for those of you who may be new to our community or just learning about us. I would like to share a bit with you about Great Caribbean, how we came about, how we got here at the University of the West Indies. And then we will have what I hope to be a lively discussion with my guests, our panelists for today, and we who will be introduced shortly. And then we will have some time for question and answer. Hopefully, you will have a lot to say. So in August 2013, my friend and colleague, the inimitable Alex Hill, who is a digital humanities scholar himself at Yale University, joined me in Dominica for the Nature Island Literary Festival, where we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the birth of Aimé Césaire. That year we honored, among the many notable aspects of Césaire's life and scholarship, the notebook of a return to my native land, a journey of his relationship with Martinique and its colonial specters. That same year, only 2 months before, I had done the unfathomable. I left a tenure track position in the United States to go back to Dominica to do something. At that time, I called it research, but what I really meant was a reset. It was a personal reset as much as a professional one, and I spent several months just thinking about what I wanted my career to look like post PhD and if being in academia, particularly US academia, was for me at all. Long story extra short, a few months later, after calling Alex again, who said, "You have to do it," Great Caribbean was a thing, if only in my mind and with just a logo at the time. I had no idea if or how it would work, and I was scared that I had taken a huge career risk and would never have an institutional affiliation ever again. Most of the time in those early months and years was spent between hopeful building and hysterical panic that I would never have a real career because I betted on building an institution that by all evidence around me in the region could and likely would fail. No money, no investment, community centered, and worst of all, nonprofit. I was a dreamer betting against all the odds. The Nature Island Literary Festival, which I referenced earlier, and for which I was an organizer and program director, would sunset its annual weekend events in 2016, another organization hit by common challenges of limited funding, public engagement, and government and policy support. Other literary festivals, including the Pioneer Calabash here in Jamaica, were meeting similar challenges during that time. This pattern of starts and stops is a familiar one for many organizations whose work exists at the intersection of advocacy, heritage, and community. I had seen growing up many NGOs and advocacy groups start with energy and just disappear. Since its inception, though, Great Caribbean has sustained itself through my own personal investment, commission projects, and generosity of donors. The Research Institute has had a significant impact on the educational landscape of Dominica and the Caribbean diaspora. More specifically, the programs designed to create Caribbean have revolutionized Caribbean studies education at the secondary and tertiary levels in the Caribbean region and the United States, significantly influenced the teaching of Caribbean cultural technology at universities in the US, UK, and around the world. Since 2014, more than 80 students have successfully completed the Research and Service Learning Internship Program, received course credit and curriculums notation at Dominica State College, and now they receive a Caribbean Digital Studies certificate from the institution, the equivalent of an academic minor. They have gone on to continue their education or enter the workforce and make use of the skills of critical thinking, experimentation, problem solving that they have garnered during their tenure. Create and Code Summer Tech Camp, our technology education program for children ages 5 to 16, has seen upwards of 1,000 students since its first branded camp in 2015, with campers advancing through the program and eventually joining the internship program once they are old enough to attend college. Alumni of both the internship program and the summer camp continue to volunteer on various projects and activities, signaling their value, impact, and spirit of continuity and service that Create Caribbean's target audience find in what it offers. In 2021, I was one of 6 co-principal investigators and Create to receive an award from Mellon Foundation under its higher learning program. This came after years of poverty, to put it nicely, and a major hurricane in 2017 that took our sign off the wall. The Grant for the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective, as it is named, supports the development and expansion of teaching, research, and community engagement in the Caribbean at the intersection of Caribbean studies and digital scholarship. Create Caribbean is a sub-awardee of this grant, managed now by Yale University, and Create is the only institution as part of the PI profile that is not a long-established university. The other institutions include the University of Puerto Rico and the University of Miami. As part of Create Caribbean's work to develop the field of digital humanities, as well as other themes of research focus, we have added the Community Partners Program that invites organizations, institutions, and public agencies doing work in areas of literary and cultural heritage, environmentalism and sustainability, literacy and education, and youth development work to receive training, mentorship, and support from the Institute. The program offers a summer intensive training workshop on digital methods and tools that organizations can use to improve their advocacy and goals, mentorship from the Create Caribbean team in developing and completing programs and projects, and support from Create Caribbean interns who provide technical and other types of labor to partner projects. One of the most significant achievements of this grant so far, though, is the partnership with UWI Mona's Department of Literature and English under the banner of the Community Partners Program. The DLIE and Faculty of Humanities and Education, by extension, has begun to benefit from the existing structure with fellowships for postgraduate students and internships for undergraduate students in the department's programs and faculty development training in digital humanities themes for lecturers. And our graduate fellows and interns are in the room, some of them wearing shirts, so you can see that. While these achievements certainly highlight the innovation of the Create Caribbean team to operate and make a global impact, the work now visualize and strategize about the long-term sustainability of the organization and to ensure that it can expand its program and its reach in years to come. I wanted to begin the public celebration with some introspection and outrospection, if you will. I wanted to reflect in the company of friends and supporters on the work that Create Caribbean has achieved for the intellectual and cultural growth in the region. But I also wanted to ask a bigger question. How can I be a part of a process to create even more critical mass around the work of decolonial education, reparative cultural care, and youth advocacy in the ways I have tried to do with Create, in ways that I haven't yet imagined are possible? The bottom line is we need more of us, and we need more of us to be around for a long time, supporting the work of arts, culture, and the humanities more broadly. So I wanted to bring together a few people to think with me through some of these broader categories and questions that have been on my mind for all of the 10 years. I want to say that Great Caribbean would not be possible without the strength of the individuals and groups who have supported me through these limited funds, natural disasters, institutional barriers, border restrictions, et cetera, The community begins with my family and extends to my co-PIs who have been teachers, mentors, friends, and also to my students, some of whom have worked with me long before there was an academic or financial incentive to do so. They just want to learn and have a safe space to play, fail, and try again. That community extends to the presenters I have asked to participate today, who support the work of the Institute and who, in their own ways, work towards community and institutional infrastructure around preservation, repair, continuity, and legacy building. I'll now ask our graduate fellow, Joanna Jackson, to formally introduce the panelists before we begin the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I am Joanna Jackson, a graduate fellow, and I will be introducing our panelists for the day. And to start off, we have Natasha Lightfoot, Dr. Natasha Lightfoot. She is an associate professor in the Department of History and Faculty, fellow in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University. Her research and teaching interests include Atlantic slavery and emancipation, Black community formation and acts of resistance, and daily practice of freedom in the 19th century British Caribbean. She is the author of Troubling Freedom, Antigua and the Aftermath of British Emancipation, which focuses on Black working people's struggles and everyday forms of liberation in British colonial Antigua. After slavery's end, she has also been published in the New York Times as well as a number of academic journals, including the C.L.R. James Journal, Slavery and Abolition, Small Acts, and most recently the William and Mary Quarterly. Her research has been supported by fellowships from the American Antiquarian Society, the Ford Foundation, the Schoenberg Center of Research in Black Culture, and most recently from the American Council of Learned Societies. She also initiated a digital archive preservation project at the Antigua and Barbuda National Archives through a grant from the British Library. She is currently writing a book titled Fugitive Cosmopolitans about enslaved people's mobility, imperial subjecthood, and struggles for freedom between empires in the Caribbean. Our next panelist would be Nicole Morrison. She is a jack of all trades. Nicole Morrison loves all things creative, using her passion for nature, culture, art, and addressing social issues. She creates awareness through her art, advocacy, and work, working for 4.5 years in Anguilla in real estate with a focus on the preservation and rehabilitation of historic Caribbean-style buildings and villas. Followed by Hurricane Maria and Irma, her life took a complete turn. This marked the beginning of her advocacy journey as well as her return to her homeland, Dominica. Nicole is also a board member of SHAPE, Society for Historic Architectural Preservation and Enhancement, whose mission is the preservation of Tikal and other Dominican historical buildings and architecture. She is also a member of Artist Association, and only Artists Association on the Field Guest House, which was built in 1934, with the earliest building on the property dating back to the 1700s. Springfield was home to the John Archibald Research Center by Clemson University until the passing of Hurricane Maria. Nicole is working to restore the building in the same style and hopefully open the property to the public for visits. Nicole recently attended the Climate Justice Camp, Caribbean edition held in St. Martin, which was the first of its kind. The camp brought together 126 climate advocates representing different organizations and causes to raise awareness about climate change with one unified Caribbean voice. Nicole believes in being the change she wants to see and hopes to contribute to and create awareness in whatever avenues she can. Now, these two panelists are on Zoom, and the third panelist is here at the UWI Mona campus, live and in person, Dr. Sonia Salinia. She is a Jamaican scholar, international speaker, consultant, and senior lecturer in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, where she was director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies. She is a leading author, teacher, and researcher on Black Atlantic performance, geographies, popular culture, and the sacred, and Caribbean cultural studies more broadly. She holds international appointments as a member of the International Scientific Committee of the Slave Root Project, UNESCO, Senior Research Associate Honorary, Rhodes University, and Advisor, International Cultural Diversity Organization. She is the author of numerous publications, among them the acclaimed Dance Hall, From Slave Ship to Ghetto, and editor of Dancehall, a reader on Jamaican music and culture. Among others, her research and opinions have appeared in various media, among them Netflix, The Guardian, BBC, The Washington Post, NPR, The Fader, and Pop Matters. In 2019, she introduced the Sound Culture book series at the UWI Press, which is dedicated to publishing original work on Caribbean music. She is an avid hiker and inaugurator of Reggae Hikers. And thank you very much. Please enjoy the discussion we have for you today. Those are our two panelists, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Sir.
Thank you so much, Joanna. So I brought out all my fancy friends for the event. Thanks for being here. So Natasha, I'd like to invite you first. I have the first question for you. I would like for you to be the historian, the lovely historian that you are, and help us contextualize institution building in the Caribbean. Caribbean is frankly a miracle because I am tired every day, and every day there's a reason to say, no thanks, let me go back to my day job. And I think over history, we can see so many of our leaders, our past leaders, regular people, even I think about Troubling Freedom and the daily lives of people that you describe post-emancipation in that book, trying to form community around issues regarding labor, issues regarding their own sovereignty, rights for land and all of those things. What I want to ask you is a big question. Just help me situate Great Caribbean for a bit within this historical context of institutions and movements that have pushed for Caribbean determination and sovereignty, particularly around knowledge production and repair from slavery.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I wanted to first start off by expressing my appreciation to Schuyler and the Create Caribbean team for the invitation. And also just want to say that the sort of trajectory of institution building and struggling to self-determine is essentially one that we could easily date back to even before the end of slavery, which is basically what I write about. You know, I'm assuming many of you all in the room would understand that under British colonialism, all of the English-speaking islands were essentially sites of profit for the British Empire. There was no intention of making these sites places where independent culture would blossom. and
Natasha,
people,
one second, I'm so sorry.
making
We are
these
having
sites,
in the room
places where
difficulties. I'm so sorry.
independent culture would
Give us one
blossom.
second.
And
Natasha, one second, I'm. Try again.
Okay, I'm speaking now. And I was typing into the chat that there is a delay of about 5 to 10 seconds after I speak, that I hear it in the room with you. So I don't know if that's still the case, but hopefully it's now real time. Any better?
There's still a delay. I'm so sorry. Give us, the tech team is trying to figure out where the delay is. I think it's in the room we are. There's
Okay.
still a- Try again, Natasha.
So can you hear me now? Are you hearing it in real time? Yes?
I
Okay.
absolutely am. I think we found a problem.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Thank you again.
No, so just to get started on this big question, I'm gonna see if I can even wrap it up more quickly, even though, because since we lost time. But I was saying that, historically, these places in the Anglophone Caribbean were sites for, enslaved labor and profit for the benefits of the empire, for the British Crown. So essentially, these were places in which culture and intellectual production obviously was not an intended result of the system that was being set up um, by the plantation structure. And so ultimately, anything that does happen in this vein is purely through the innovation of exploited people. And so ultimately, the first forms of schooling that took place in the region were religious education that was meant to foster a certain type of obedience and complicity with the plantation, sort of the edifice of the plantation, and ultimately we're supposed to foster, people who wouldn't question how they were being governed, what they were being taught. But with each successive generation, there were moves to try and widen who had access to the life of the mind. And ultimately, in the meanwhile, there were always people who were producing all kinds of communal structures that formed an alternative way of ordering the world and of fostering senses of identity that moved well outside of the um, the categories that colonialism would set up for Black people as degraded, as people without history, as a people without intellect. So we could look at rebellions like the ones that I chart in defense of the Sunday market by enslaved people in Antigua, or the entire pantheon of revolt that takes place after the end of slavery across various British Caribbean territories, all of which are aimed at pushing for freedom to be much more meaningful. Morant Bay in Jamaica in 1865, or the Federation riots in Barbados in 1876, etc. We could go on right up until the labor rebellions of the 1930s across the region and see all of those as text, a certain kind of learning. We could also think about the sort of everyday forms of ultimately world making that would take shape outside of those moments of spectacular conflagration. So how people worshipped in different ways that sort of both were taking the tools of the impositions of the Christian church and reformulating them in more liberatory fashion, also finding ways to practice other non-European based religions like say Rastafari that would develop in the 1930s, or forms that well predated that go back to slavery. So and forms that are sort of seen less as like denominations and more like again community forms of African tradition, Obia, Mayel, etc. Those kinds of things can all also be read as a certain different kind of text. People have always been asking questions as well about how to govern themselves. And so through full adult suffrage, yes, but also through community organizations that have their own internal structures. So I talk a little bit in my book about friendly societies as a kind of site for you know, a different form of governance, free villages as a site for independent, you know, construction of community. So all of these kinds of sites, I think, I feel like I'm rambling, but I just feel like there's so many different ways we could come at this from the perspective of, you know, festivals, carnival, Junkanoo, things like that, as also a certain type of manifestation of intellectual production. Everything that Caribbean people have done has had something quite incredible at its root in terms of what could be traced in essentially an intellectual tradition, right? And Create Caribbean, as well as you know, sort of if we kind of fast forward to the moment of the now, and what something like Create Caribbean is inheriting is a legacy of both sort of formal educational moves toward the creation of secondary and tertiary education that is much more accessible to the people. So the formation of UWI, the expansion of schooling on the secondary level to not just privilege people of certain religions, certain races, certain family formations. I think about schools in Antigua that didn't let people in because they were not in a family in wedlock, right? So things like that sort of expanding. Create Caribbean is a beneficiary of this generational expansion of access to formal knowledge, but also the beneficiary in many ways of the kinds of what, you know, scholarly, you know, scholarly studies might label informal, but certainly we might, as Caribbean people, label primary knowledge, right? Of how to build community, how to sustain each other, how to trace identity through all different kinds of ways that, you know, the formal archive, the formal record might not actually be able to capture in its fullness and beauty. So Create Caribbean is actually doing a certain kind of bridging of those two forms of knowledge production, if that makes sense. And I think it represents something exciting for what could be, you know, a kind of replicable model with the right sorts of support across the region. There's so much more of this kind of work that needs to be done. So I feel like I could stop there, and probably should, because I want to hear from others on this subject, but I hope that begins to answer the question of how we could contextualize Create Caribbean in a long durée around fights for self-determination, reparatory justice, and knowledge about both.
Thank you so much, Natasha. You did the TikTok. That was a good history lesson from 1834. Um, I do like where you start talking about the bridge between the community spaces, the organic spaces and the academic spaces, because I think ultimately my own life and my work is, I sort of was born and live at that juncture between being what I keep telling my students in my real life, I really wanted to be a girl from the book because I am. And I was born a nerd and I am constantly fighting, I just want to be childish for the rest of my life. I have to be a grown up. But I was born in a working class community that for the most part and raised there, lived there my whole life, was the primary location of a manufacturing company that used to be a plantation. And it was the first 24-hour workspace in the country. And because of that, my neighborhood, the community, the entire life was built around this estate and the machinations of that estate, even up to the 2000s, right? And it's reopened now under a different brand, but it still has the same kind of relationship with the community. And so I've always seen people working, I've always seen people organizing, always been part of my life, my own family life. I came to this work because of my family's relationship to organizing and to civic life, and watching my dad and my uncles, my grandfather's house being a place where Maurice Bishop and George Lamb got together and talked about what they used to call work study. In the 1960s and 70s, they used to have work study groups where they met regionally to talk about anti-colonial plans and independence plans and all of the work that they were doing. So I sort of feel like I was always meant to do this because I was taught how to do this, but there was also all these other reasons in the same community that I'm talking about where this would be just as unlikely. People are living in situations of poverty. They were living on the coastline of the Queen Street chains where they settled after the 3 estates in that neighborhood, and everyone's crowded and everybody's working and people have lack, right? And I grew up seeing that and understanding the difference between what I had been given in terms of the models in my own home and what the children around me lacked, what they didn't have, what they didn't get to see, what they didn't get to experience, just by not having books in their house, not by having a yard to play in because they live so close to each other. All of those things are informing the bridge between my sort of destiny to be an academic in a lot of ways and the reality of my life, which is still a very much part of my life, right? And so while Create Caribbean is an independent organization, and I'm proud of being able to build it by myself without having a quote unquote affiliation and also unlearning in the Caribbean how unnecessary or how much we bind ourselves to the sense of I need an institution to give me power, right? And learning that I didn't need that validation in order to do something. But it does help to be able to be in community with the university to do this work because the structure, the University of West is about 75 years old. We celebrated last year. It is a 20th century formation too. It is very young in the history of universities, and there is still a lot of growing and building to happen here. So I think it is important for me in both these roles to kind of think about bridging, which brings me to my next question for Sonia about your work in the faculty board meetings and resource mobilization. I would like to mobilize us towards some thoughts on advocacy. We talk a lot about it at work and at UWI, in faculty, particularly the humanities is always under stress globally. We constantly, and I oppose this, I'm professionally and personally, I oppose the argument that we have to make a case for ourselves and go outside. That's the case, like look around. we constantly on the defensive, right, as disciplines, as a faculty to say that we belong here and we are the core of what happens, and my students know, they know I tell them in secret all the time, humanities people are the smartest people, because we can solve problems on a dime, they know I say that. But I want to think about engaging our publics and engaging popular culture and digital cultures, particularly as you have been working to do in the last few years around making this case, right? For the value of the arts and culture and humanities work, particularly around reparative justice and reparative justice as a frame for this work needs to exist because it is part of what makes us people, right? Not just reparations, but also repair of our sense of self and our sense of Caribbean identity that is not tied to suffering or supplication and so on. What have you experienced as some of the challenges within our academic and, like myself, academic adjacent institutions that you have been affiliated with through your work, that in responding to this digital age and the moment we have where we have all of this opportunity to use the digital to help us to do this work? What are some of the challenges that you have experienced, and what are some of the key success factors that you would say we should be engaging to stay relevant and connected to our publics and make ourselves not have to fight so hard to be valued?
Wow. So, let me start by positioning both the work that I've done and the context of the institution in which I operate as one which, has embodied a sort of tenacious disobedience. And it's important to start there because if you don't have the temerity in a post-colonial context to, while taking account of the weight of the history, and I mean, Natasha spoke quite eloquently to that history, locating institutions, but I think what's needing a voice is the way in which we have had to embody this tenacious disobedience. And I want to start there because in the work that I've done, it took a while to locate the value, because we're not oriented to even locate value in the work that we're doing. We are actually taught in the context of an academic institution that our only value is when we stand up in front of a classroom to teach. And so I had to step outside of that with that tenacious disobedience to understand that there is value every time I open my mouth, because I've spent the time to actually analyze the social landscape in which I operate in order to make statements and to provide answers to questions. And so let me use Jamaican dancehall as an example. That locating my own work in a social space that has never had space to be itself, that has never had space to be validated, that has never had space, the very people putting Jamaica on the map have never had any kind of legitimacy. In fact, what they have had are strategies thrown at them for their very own obliteration. So when I open with a context of understanding this tenacious disobedience, I also want to locate the fact that you look at a country like Jamaica, you think of Jamaican dancehall, you think of reggae, you think of the cultural assets that we've gifted the world, and the way in which whoever is talking needs to be muting themselves. You think of the ways in which those assets have become that global imaginary by which we locate the Caribbean, the entire Caribbean. But let's look at the ways in which these very assets don't have a location in the very homes that they come from. So we have no major, music museum. We don't have those kinds of institutions of preservation. We do not have any historic trail that locates what Natasha spoke about, Rastafari. If you think of all the spaces around Jamaica that could be located that are important to Rastafari, no trail. Much less Jamaican music, no trail, no heritage trail. And if you think of the ways in which the United Nations,
Oh,
whoever is not speaking, please mute yourselves. If you think of the United Nations and the kind of structures around the slave road project, for example, that I'm associated with, there is advocacy, there's funding, there are institutional networks being built to locate and put on a pedestal things related to a history of enslavement. But in Jamaica, we don't have a slave road project per se. So I want to position the fact that we operate in a sort of gap. The Caribbean is in a sort of gap. And while we have institutions that, exist with some degree of air that they can breathe, there's so much that is missing. And so I go to some of the challenges that we have and that I have experienced, certainly in my own work. And I want to give an example. I went to a conference in Germany a few years ago, and I saw the call for papers circulated via the internet. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this looks interesting. And in the spirit of Bob Marley that we're celebrating now in the context of the movie One Love, I proposed a paper on Marley. The conference was focused on heroes, heroizations, and heroisms. And when I went to Frankfurt, no, it wasn't Frankfurt, sorry, Freiburg, there were 35 scholars invited from around the world, looking at heroes, heroizations, and heroisms. And there were also 45 researchers operating in 15 research groups with 5 years of funding from the German government, looking at heroes, heroizations, and heroisms. And I reflected to myself and I wondered, when have we ever spent money in the Caribbean over 5 years to look at one single dege topic like that? When? Not Ian Saltfish, not Usain Bolt's running prowess, not Jamaican dancehall. I certainly have not had that kind of funding to do my research. Not avocado oil, not nothing. It's nothing. Our mic is dead. So literally, we are operating with the first challenge, which is that of financial support. The kind of financial support that has an ideological and philosophical underpinning on the underbelly, that is not something we have to fight for. There is location in an understanding of the need for that finance, and therefore, not sure what's going on.
We can still hear you.
Sorry? Yes. Oh, great. So the financial challenge is number one. In order to get that financing, we always have to be convincing somebody of the importance of culture. When you walk into the boardrooms, you are being told, and this is now not third party, this is my experience, that culture it's not going to get any funding. That's what we're doing. And if you think about structures, so when we go back to institutions, the very structures that we have in place, the ministries of culture, for example, and I've served, for example, on the Entertainment Advisory Board in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport for some time. We've been having the same conversations for 10 years. We've been having the very same conversation for 10 years, not moving on things that are important, like entertainment zones, to be able to have institutions or cultural assets such as Jamaican dancehall or reggae have the sorts of spaces that they need. Another kind of challenge we have is related to what I call the big 3 C's. We are not yet, unfortunately, and I want to congratulate Great Caribbean on the kinds of work that have become part and parcel of your entire raison d'etre. That in the context of climate change and the sustainable development questions, we are not focused on one of the big C's, which is collaboration. And so when you think of a country like Germany, Germany again, Netherlands, there are advanced conversations about night economy. We are not there. What we are doing is putting in place structures that would delete the very context of the night economy that we can foster. So where do we go from here? And I think that's one of the successes would have to do with the way in which, with our tenacity, we have managed, and I certainly walk on the backs of those who have come before me, in putting Jamaican culture, in putting Caribbean culture on the map. We heard earlier about festivals, carnivals, the ways in which our night economy has thrived despite the very apparatuses of the state and the legislative structures that have been put in place to suppress the very cultural assets that we have given the world. So that's the spirit in which I do reparatory justice work in a cultural context. And now, in my own academic life, understanding that the work I do in cultural studies, in cultural geography, in the kind of cultural history that I do, it is also reparatory justice work when I'm going to tell a funder that I need research support in order to map the history of entertainment, especially in the African diaspora. When I teach courses such as psychohistoriography and reparatory justice, and I must, in fact, just laud the work of Freddie Hickley, which we have just now, in 2024, I think, coming to grips with an understanding of this work, certainly in the 2020s to now, that reparatory justice work cannot be done without an understanding of psychohistoriography. And that, of course, leans on the work of scholars such as Elsa Bubayo, and it implicates the kind of methodological conversations we must have in the context of humanities. And I've been in conversations with a few colleagues in a global context, asking the question, Create Caribbean becomes an example of the methodological work that we must do. And that's a context for understanding the success of the kind of tenacious disobedience that we must have. But also, what does methodological work look like in a 21st century context when we consider the intersections of the reparatory justice work that we must do, the cultural work that we must do, the historical work that we must do, and the technological work that we must do in a context where this age of the Anthropocene throws up all of these big C problems, climate change, questions of collaboration, questions of cybersecurity, all of those C's that we must consider. So I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thanks so much. I want to go back to some things that you were talking about at the beginning of your comments, because I think both you and Natasha are touching on something, the value of culture and how we must be willing to risk, to be taking risks outside of the people who do not value our work. I talked to my students about they're here. Last week we got into it because they keep asking me to show them how to do things. I want to kind of return to this. I think my tenacious disobedience is always in my classroom, and that's why Caribbean has worked as well as it has. They always want me to tell them what to do. And I'm like, I don't know, girl. What should you do? Don't I say that? I do, because what should you do? I think there is what happens in, Natasha called it something before around the obedience and the compliance issue from colonial education. Part of my methodology has always been about decolonizing the classroom. It's a tenet of digital humanities work. Collaboration is a sort of it works well for us in the Caribbean, that digital humanities has given us this framework of breaking down what a classroom looks like. One of the first things I teach in a digital humanities course is a Bill of Rights of the student. And it says, I have a right to learn, I have a right to teach, I have a right to play, I have a right to ask questions of my instructor. It has a list of things and they go through it. And every time in Dominica, I'm doing with students who are at CAPE level, so the students who are part of the program in Dominica Cape level. Our first cohort of interns at UMONA undergraduate interns are mostly level 1 students. They're right here. They're all looking for me to tell them what to do because that's what CSEC does. That's what CXC tells them. Tell me what to do. I have a student in the room who's hiding behind her computer right now because just this morning, me and her got into it. Please, you read my thing and tell me if it's good. I don't know if it's good, girl. Do you think it's good? Do you have something to say? So even when we're fighting like big issues around technology, like AI and threats, which my students and I talk about all the time, and I'm very honest with them. I also tell them that relying technology is a vehicle, it's methods. It's a way to help us better understand ourselves. It is not the work. AI cannot win against me because I always gonna have words. AI will implode upon itself if it's only using the one data set of words that it has. It's going to end because I'm a programmer, I know that. It's going to implode on itself. It requires us to participate. It requires a human to feed it, to give it that energy. So why not have more good actors than bad actors? Right? And also, why do you not trust yourself that you have something to say? Who taught you that your opinion is less valuable than mine? Right? I think one of the things that we talk about, all of these things are going back all the way to like C.L.R. James and all of these people whose work I have read and understood how we came to be. When George Lamming was talking about his place in the world and coming into manhood and writing and so on, he's 32 years old, right? He was a young man. And so I think about reading The Pleasures of Exile and realizing that George Lamming was 32. I'm like, I'm 32. I don't think I could cook and do laundry in the same day. George Lamming was writing things, right? And so in perspective, if you look at history, and I offer them those examples, I say, young people have been doing this work for a long time. Why do you feel so defeated by those things, right? Why do you constantly feel so defeated by, it's designed that way. The educational system is designed that way. It's designed to tell you that the classroom is the only space. And like you were saying, we as academics are taught that our value is here, only here in this space. And I said, well, what if I really had a crisis over not having an affiliation when I quit? Because everyone, when I was leaving the United States, especially in the Caribbean, told me not to go home. Don't come back. There's nothing here. You live in US money. All kinds of things, and you're doing it so young in your career, you're never gonna get another job. That was what this is what I was told regularly. Right, and so I said, okay, I might never work again. I might go plant bananas, I know how to do that. And I did for a while, but again, I think this is a lesson I'm trying to, it's the methodology question, is what are the other ways that we can do this work? And I was happy when we got the grant, of course, the Mellon grant sort of changed my life and the trajectory of this work and made us make it to 10 years in a really powerful and meaningful way. But what I learned from the grant, it doesn't solve the problems of the knowing, the world making, what Alex calls ontologizing the world, how we make ourselves know more about ourselves, right? Like it doesn't fix that. In fact, I'm more tired now that I have the money because I'm begging people to take it to convince them to know these things, right? So I think that is one of the junctures that I'm at, and this is where I want to call on Nicole to talk to us about. Nicole has been part of our summer intensive training and the community partners program. She's in a lot of organizations that are community partners with Great Caribbean as a result of the grant and the funding we've been able to secure to support community organizations, smaller, mostly volunteer organizations of people doing this work at the sort of grassroots level. And Nicole, he has been working with these different organizations in so many ways. So I really, Nicole, are you there? Can you hear us? Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Great. I really wanted to ask you to contribute from your perspective as a lady, a Nicole of all trades. Nicole is in all the organizations who participated in the last year. She's an artist. She is with SHAPE. SHAPE is our architectural preservation society in Dominica. And she also is a historian in her own way and is working and has worked with tangible heritage, fixing up the buildings, giving restoration to our physical landscapes and so on. And so Nicole, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, working with these smaller organizations and most of them being volunteer, no secure funding, etc. What are some of the challenges to the the longevity of the spaces? And why do you think spaces like Great Caribbean are important? And what role can we play in helping to keep those organizations going and motivated?
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation, Dr. Esprit. I really appreciate it. And I have to say, being in part of so many organizations, sometimes it can feel like it is a lot. Honestly, it can. And for me, I guess it's the passion and the drive for advocacy. And even as I stated in my bio, being the change, being the change that I want to see. So I volunteer nonetheless. Has it hurt my pocket? Yes, it has. Has it affected my mental well-being? Yes, it has. It is something that is born out of passion and, as I said, working towards being the change that I want to see. As where funding is concerned, that is something any organization that I am a part of, I love numbers and I love dealing with numbers. I do project management. I also did accounting for a while. So I understand the importance of funding and also understand the importance of funding because, again, it's my pocket. A lot of these passion projects come from. So me being in part of this organization, I cannot stress the importance enough about funding and for the creation of workshops, for the creation of education and informing people, and etc. etc. Even for your day-to-day operations, like in one of those particular organizations recently, I had to be, while we were transitioning onto a new board, I had to take on the role of, I was the treasurer, so I had to take on the role of treasurer, of secretary, of project manager, of this and of that. And again, as I said, funding and extending the importance of funding to the groups. But then what I realized, especially in this group that we were lacking, was grant writers. So there was a lot of grants coming in for our organization, but it was like, okay, yes, we can jump, we can get this money. However, we had no grant writers. So because of that, a lot of deadlines start passing one after the next. Also, because of the lack of grant writers and a lot of people taking on many roles, that created another confusion of, wait, we don't have, how much can I stretch myself? How thin can I stretch myself? So that was one of our biggest issues as well. Also, another thing is funding is where to look. So in one group or one of the organizations I was in, the problem was more or less finding grant writers to write these grants for us or to help us to write these grants, or even creating workshops on grant writing. Who do we contact to give us workshops on grant writing? Is there a way that we can work with a grant writer to get a percentage? And on the other end, in another group as well, is another NGO, our problem was, where's the grants for our organization? We have everything in place. We have all the paperwork in place. We have the data, the this, the that. However, it was very hard to find grants in that respect. And even for myself, like recently, as we stated in the bio, I took part, I was one of the persons selected out of 500 persons who applied. I think 126 of us represented the Caribbean, and I represented Dominica at the Caribbean Climate Justice camp or conference in St. Martin. And I must admit, just as I was on the verge of giving up, I'm telling you literally, a week before I went to this camp, I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and I'm like, I am going to give up on advocacy. I'm going to give up on all of this because for me, at a certain time, it felt like it made no sense because you're trying to get people involved and you're trying to let people realize that, yo, we are going through this. It's time to create awareness. It's time to speak up. It's time to this. And it feels like you literally pushing a cattle to the river. You know, they say you cannot force a cattle to drink it. You can only bring it to the river. You cannot force it to drink. Well, I'm the type of person I like to force people to drink. So even going to this, I just got tired and mentally tired, emotionally tired. And I'm like, why am I here? Why am I even in Dominica? I love the island, but it's like trying to get people mindset to open and also attending certain meetings. I realized we have no data collection. So all the stresses and all the amount of work that we had to do, it really placed the pressure on me. And going to this camp, and I have to say big up to them, to big up to organizations like them, and big up to organizations like Create. It's like Create Caribbean. It's just as we're about to give up, here is this little hope. Here is this little inkling. This little spark is what we needed. So attending that camp, I met other activists and leaders like myself from different foundations, from different organizations, people that have worked with policymakers in their country, and seeing that we are divided by the Caribbean Sea, but it's the same thing that pulls us together and make us a loud, united voices, a loud, united voice. It literally sparked that passion that was literally dying inside of me to not only keep doing what I'm doing and know that I am not alone in this, but there are also other people who's also fighting in their own way. It's just a matter of meeting and uniting our voice, uniting the things we would like to speak about, the social issues we would like to address. And for that same opportunity, as with Create Caribbean, there I've met lawyers in human rights. I've understand how social issues and climate justice coincide, how the paths cross with each other, and grant opportunities, and the people who was just willing to help me and tell me, Nicole, if you need information on this, I got you. If you need somebody to review a proposal, I got you. And it really felt great. So having more foundations and the importance of educating people and even marketing that these opportunities are out there or these foundations are out there to help people like myself who don't even know where to start, where to go or whatnot. It is very important, like Great Caribbean and the foundations I was working with is Roots as well, and also Breadfruit Collective. That's an organization in Guyana. It it literally gives us, how I would say it, the pump of energy that we need to keep fighting and to realize why we should not be silent. It gives us the power to advocate or speak up on a lot of the issues addressing the Caribbean region. Because even though we are separate islands and we are divided, as I said, by the sea, our issues are the same, the social issues are the same. The need for archiving a lot of information is important. Like recent times I've been working with an intern from Create Caribbean for the property that I'm the current project and property manager of, Springfield Guest House, which was also a research center, John Archibald Research Center. And it's, even though I'm working there, and when I got the property, a lot of it, there was debris everywhere and whatnot. There was a lot of papers that I could also throw away and burn because you know the practice in the Caribbean. That's not good. Throw it, burn it. That's not good. Why are you collecting garbage? Why are you collecting this? How I would say, the inquisitive person in me decided to sit and look through a lot of things before I burn them and I throw them. And I realized there's a wealth of knowledge in there and it is not digitized at all. And I'm like, how do I get this digitized? How do I get that information? How do I get that information out there? How do I get that information out there? And just as I was wondering all these things, bam, in one of my group, I saw the post about Create Caribbean doing a summer intensive program. And even though we had a representative from SHIP and we had a representative from WA, I was like, I need to get in this one way or another. So I started making some calls, and I found out that I could enter through the company, through the organization I work with, or through being a project manager for Springfield. And it's a great, it was the best decision ever, because through the summer intensive program, Dr. Esper decided to work with me as well, have an intern assigned to us, and we could digitize a lot of the information and the documents that was collected. There was information about Dominica's medical history dated all the way back to the 30s. The amount of information that was collected, but they were all typed out, written in books, and I did not even really know about it. I mean, I just kept it in a little drawer, but I never went through it thoroughly. And when the intern came, we would go through it, and then we realized, but wait a minute, is that information was ever documented? And she was saying plenty of the things that she found, she haven't seen it anywhere in the whole process of them archiving information from Dominica. And I was like, wow, I am so happy that I decided to take the leap of faith. And even though I am not fully technologically savvy, but through Create Caribbean, I learned how to step by step create a website, and also talk to them about creating a website where we can share that information that we have archived, digitally archived through from Springfield to the public and to the people who need it the most. Because sometimes we don't realize the solution to plenty of the social issues that we're having. The solution is right in front of us. It's sometimes right in our history books. Like, for example, plenty of the things is right at Springfield. And I can look at some of them and be like, oh, that's how it was before. That makes sense of why we're going through this now. So even in the process of looking back, sometimes we find our answer or the solution to our problems right in front of us. So I am, once again, I don't want to go on rambling, but I cannot stress the importance of having organizations like Create Caribbean, even like the camp that I came with, Roots, and the Bradford Collective, and all of these people like deciding to put themselves out there. I know it's stressing. Trust me, I have lived in a state of survival mode as an activist, so I know how stressing it is. But I am very happy and I'm grateful to organization like you all. And I decide to make it my duty. As soon as I see something, I'm sharing it in every possible group I know, because there are people looking, as much as sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but there are people who are tenacious and who is looking for these opportunities to speak up and to contribute in whatever way they can. So thanks again, Dr. Esper.
Thanks, Nicole. Nicole shared so much about the experience of what happens every day at Create Caribbean, which is the interns. I send them to do a thing. They say, "Please tell us what to do." I say, "No, I believe in you." And I send them to do it, and they come back, they're like, "Oh, you know this man?" I was like, "Yeah, he's in the history books in the before times. People existed." And they are so fascinated that there were people in history and they did things in the Caribbean. But imagine how rare it is that even here at UWI, we taking Caribbean civilization and all of these courses. And I frequently find my students shocked and awed to find out what they never encountered in school or in secondary school and so on. And so a lot of the archival work, the digitization work, is not just about the preservation of the artifacts. We're doing a lot of 3D archiving right now, which is pretty cool for the students and for myself. I'm having fun. But also just teaching them in real time. They're actually handling the documents, so they have to scan it and read what's on the page. We have somebody who needs to be muted. Yeah, so I think what Nicole said is really important, and I wanted to we started late, but we're running out of time. So I want to make a few points before I go to our last everybody question. Nicole touched on something that is really important for us to talk about in the sustainability conversation is the exhaustion, and the wellness factor, that we don't, even those of us who work at UWI talk about this all, everything seems like a lot all the time. And then I have Create Caribbean and it's a lot all the time. I'm literally working 7 days a week and I've worked 7 days a week for the last 10 years. It's a feat. And it's not, it has this type of work has a cost only because even when I did put a lot of my own money and my own time, and for the most part of this 10 years, just only maybe a year and a half, this was the only thing I was doing. For the most part, I always have a day job, a full-time day job while doing this, and this is a full-time program. And I didn't always have a lot of staff. So I say this from the perspective of the volunteers, the people who one of the things of the Mellon grant, the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective, that is so important is that Mellon gave us $5 million and said, put it in the hands of people who are doing Caribbean work. And one of the things we wanted to do was put it in the hands of Caribbean people doing Caribbean work. And we have to dig far and wide. It involves travel. It involves recruitment. It involves me being a grown-up and being in public, talking to people, which I do not like unless it's a classroom. It involves me having to do social media things. It involves us having to put our bodies in places to say, here we have something. And when we get there, let them believe us. There's a lot of skepticism because a lot of research has happened in the Caribbean. A lot of vulnerable communities have been offered things. People have come and done research about Caribbean people and Caribbean communities and not given them their word, not respecting their traditions. There's a lot of things that we are fighting against as the people, the custodians of this grant that we are trying to disseminate. And we have been, in the first 2 years that we just completed, we have been able to do so much. It is, couldn't imagine that all of this would have happened. The Community Partners Program was not in the original draft of the grant. I thought of it 3 months after I got the money. I was like, okay, this is a longer, better way to disseminate the money. I was just going to do summer intensive. I was like, what's the point of training people if I'm not going to help them to take it somewhere and do something with it and support them longer term, and we help them with grant writing. Community partners have gotten grants that we have helped them to write. So it is a longer term commitment, which means it is a longer term labor of those of us who do this work. And so there is a lot of times that the failures we think about are external funding and all of those things, and the organizations disappear. But a lot of the things that need care and support are the time, the leisure, the freedom for the people doing the work. And how much staff you have, you're still doing all of this work, right? I don't think I've worked as hard as I have this last 2 years, even if I thought that having all this money was gonna make me go on fancy vacations. I don't know when. But it is a myth, that you get all this money and you're will be lightened. All it does for people like us is give us bigger dreams and say, here, there's more work that can be done. Let me invest in that. So I think it's important to put on the table that a lot of that work requires care and care for each other and care for oneself as part of the collaborative effort. But my final question is a big dreamy one. One of the internal and project taglines, every project I do and design at Create Caribbean, we do one major digital project a year. It comes on one premise in the age of climate disaster and cyber disasters, etc., that the Caribbean is in the future. People try to tell us all the time that we're gonna sink, we're gonna drown. On my voice days when the children are wasting things, I tell them that, to scare them a little. But the Caribbean is in the future. We are going to be here. We have been here before the encounter. We were here minding our business, and Christopher Columbus couldn't read a map. The Caribbean is here, right? We are. You see, I like this all the time. So I think about this idea of the future and thinking about Caribbean futures. Create Caribbean is a way to keep the Caribbean always already in the future. And so I want to ask you all, we'll start with Natasha and go in the same order. What kind of future do you imagine for the region? And how do you think the intersection of digital transformation and cultural and heritage preservation can help shape that future? So some of you have more time than others to think the question. Natasha, you want to pass? You want to think more?
I don't know if can you hear me?
I can.
So
I'll bring you back to the front.
So really the very first and kind of only thing I think about is more knowledge for everyone all the time. The real question of how this work can become sustainable across several generations into the future is about how much the general public is able to understand that this is just as important as the civil service or the formal education system or sports or any other ministry that you might think of, land and development, that kind of thing. Like, I don't know. And I thought about it in the term of ministry because obviously in some ways this work is it's fully non-governmental and probably best done without the government, but still needs to have a kind of, there needs to be an approach the way, if we thought about what could, the best governance look like for Caribbean society, it would be a full kind of partnership, right, between the government and society, where like civil society really feels engaged and really understands that they're employing the government as opposed to the other way around. And so kind of tangential, but really trying to find the right metaphor for understanding that it's a kind of people first endeavor. So for instance, the conversation that that Nicole was going through in terms of talking about the nuts and bolts of grant writing, of trying to really think about physical spaces and what they need. You talked a bit about accidentally finding archival material in a building that was left for condemned, right? That is absolutely part of the challenge, is the idea that the history that we have, we don't even understand as history. In the Caribbean, a lot of, I just for instance, the digital preservation project that I worked on, I partnered with someone, an anthropologist at the time, who had had something like 40 years of research experience in Antigua. And in her early years, she actually found the copy of Antigua's, like the copy that that basically the English government sent to Antigua of the Emancipation Proclamation. She found it in like strewn about in a set of papers in the floor of what was formerly the Civil Registry's office in the 1980s when she first started her research. Right. So, we, so, and these are the kinds of things that you would think, well, surely somebody knows that they have to have that in a temperature controlled, behind glass that people can look at for generations. And yet, 150 years after the thing was written, it was on the floor in the basement of a government office. And it's a thing that literally changed the history of all of our ancestors in this room and beyond it. So I start with that example because, again, in the age of climate disaster, and the other two C's that Dr. Stanley Naya brought forth, collaboration and cybersecurity, right? Like, if we really are serious about how to marry all of those in a future agenda, that is all kind of tied up with taking stock of what we know exists already and making sure that it is safeguarded. I feel very weary about the conversation about archives because I just don't know that our people know fully what the value is of that. And so sounding the drum it only will be effective when there's more of us making the noise about this. Create Caribbean, that's the reason why I say it's a model that can it so needs to be replicated across the region, because I think about all the different arenas that both of my esteemed co-panelists identified as sites to be preserved, to be retraced, to have institutional histories tied to them. And that's the thing. We don't want every generation to have to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to have to be scrambling to find out how to historicize certain historical transformations, certain cultural manifestations, certain sites of importance to our people, certain people whose impact has more than one generation's worth of sort of effect, right? I don't know how we can do this work without consistently paying attention to how we will remember it and making sure that everybody knows that there are these methods that exist so that everybody can engage in. Everybody nowadays is walking around with a computer in their pocket. That computer has two things that you can do to become your own kind of archivist. One, taking pictures, clear pictures. Two, using the microphone and recording people's voices, recording your elders, getting the stories of your village, your church, your town, your school, your steel band, your mass camp, your any and everything. As long as you're doing that, you're already working on the work of preservation, with or without the incredible scaffolding that a Create Caribbean or a Mellon Foundation or anybody, a UE, can provide. It's still so possible. And yet we also need to be collaborative in these efforts. We have to tell each other, what are we doing? These efforts cannot exist in silos. They have to be thought about as a collective effort that builds toward, again, a much more knowledgeable region. So it's a kind of a big answer that isn't quite, I don't know if it quite fully touches on exactly what the future is, because it looks more to the past in some ways, but that's what I do as a living, as a historian, is, sort of think about the future through the lens of the past anyway. But there's just no way to understand a Caribbean future without thinking about the spectacular, transformations of the past and how we make sure we're armed with those and properly preserve those as we walk into what our future is.
Yeah, please use your phones for good. I was talking to all of the students on the call, on the Zoom, and please record your family members. These are actually really good tips because somebody has to keep the stories, and like I said, I'm tired. Let's ask Dr. Sabine Nair.
Thank you. I want to stay in the cultural vein and to amplify some of the points made earlier. The Caribbean has always been in the future by virtue of how much we've had to create, how much we've had to turn our hand to make fashion, how much we've had to innovate. We have been at the heart of some of the most important innovations globally. But guess what? We remain the ones who do not know. I'll give you a classic example. There is a global map of sound systems being created by virtue of the reality of the existence of sound systems globally. If you have some time, Google Bengal sound systems and you'll see the large apparatuses that they're creating to experience the amplification of sound. Where did that come from? That started in Jamaica with a man called Henry Jones in the 1940s, after he returned from the Second World War. Jamaicans, the Caribbean people, we are the ones who do not know that we have always been in the future. I want to also say that the Caribbean that has always been in the future, when it looks at itself, it must recognize Sylvia Winter's words, that we know who we are and we know where we're from. And that know where we are from component is very critical, because some of us are still trying to understand who we are and where we are from. So the Caribbean of the future is one that is sensitive to a Sylvia Winter, who was way before her time in the future, telling us about ourselves. That Caribbean that is in the future is also one that recognizes what institutions, well-established institutions like the World Bank, have told us about ourselves. That the Caribbean is a space in which people have some of the highest creativity quotients that exist. Have you ever heard that? Perhaps not. But if we have been the ones turning our hands to make fashion, constantly innovating, and our exports relate principally to those cultural innovations, we are those people with the highest creativity quotients. And we must know that. So a Caribbean of the future is one, Create Caribbean is going to be that organization that helps us to understand that one, we know who we are, we know where we're from, and that we have the highest creativity quotient in the world. And I think the final thing I want to say is that a Caribbean of the future is always one that is going to recognize Bob Marley's and Marcus Garvey's words, that we must continuously be in the work of removing or emancipating ourselves from mental slavery. Because that is what is holding us back from understanding that we have always been the future. And I want to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Wow. Yeah, Sylvia Winter. That's true. And we do have the highest creativity quotient. My students say they don't know, but they do know, because I keep telling them they know how to do the work, and they keep telling me no. See, I was right. Right? Nicole, I will take your final thoughts. What kind of Caribbean future do you want to see?
What kind of Caribbean future do I want to see? Oh my God. Oh my, when I think of that question, I probably think of something out of Wakanda. And pardon me, my mind is just going far, but that is how rich I think our people are. With the information we have, the fact that we're a melting pot of culture, of different cultures, and our heritage. And not only that, but the fact that we all speak different languages in different islands, but yet still, when it's time to come together, we can. The kind of, I remember watching a video on social media, and it's of Nina Simone, and she was talking about she will not give up until she make Black people realize who they are, even if they don't know who they are as yet, because we're so rich in culture, we're so rich in information, we're very intelligent set of people. So for me, the kind of future that I would like to see for the Caribbean is more or less letting us know who we are. Because I know if you don't know who you are, then you don't know where you're going, or you don't even know what you're giving up, or what you don't pay attention to. So the kind of future I'm hoping that we step into is one where we educate ourselves, not just the education you find in textbooks and whatnot, but we educate ourselves on our history, on the stories that has been handed down from generation to generation, the archiving of all that knowledge, a place where the next generation of Caribbean nationals can go to their library, and instead of seeing books or getting homework on Christopher Columbus or anybody else who had no part to play with our history, like we would more or less see the stories and see the lives of the Maroons, the Negmaos, the indigenous people, and how they fought to preserve our Caribbean region. That is what I'm more or less hoping to see in our region, in our Caribbean region. And also, something I'm really, really hoping to see, and Dr. Shiloh, I mentioned it, and Dr. Shiloh expounded on it even more, is the fact that we would no longer, as activists and as leaders in our community, that we don't live in a state of survival mode or in that state of feeling being overwhelmed. Like, people would hopefully through the education or through educating persons and young persons as well as older persons and having that conversation where we understand each other, that people will just get on board and do what they have to do. Because I feel like that is how it's moving. Like, there is a gap of trying to explain why the things we're fighting for is important, and to try to sort out and figure out that gap, that would probably make our lives a whole lot more easier. And I promise to keep fighting until that gap is closed or it's non-existent. And then I can look at a young child on the street and be like, what is the history of your people? And they'll be able to recite that to me like they recite the ABCs. And we don't have to be fighting for plenty of the simplest, simple little things that we're fighting for or creating awareness about. For me, that is the kind of Caribbean, a mentally free Caribbean, according to Bob Marley. Liberate ourselves from mental slavery. The last resistance, the last act of fighting that we need to do, that we would overcome ignorance, basically. And we can do that by archiving like the work Create Caribbean doing, and also the work that each of us is doing in our own respective fields. So a liberated, mentally, physically, emotionally liberated Caribbean. And that is kind of the work I'm working on, even with climate change, as I was talking about, that some of the social issues crossing path. For me, the biggest thing is mental health. So even coming out from that climate justice camp, I decided I'm going to take my work on my shoulders. And I would like to start a collective or foundation of how do we address mental health in climate justice. We see so much things, especially in our own individual fields, whatever it is. If it's not climate justice, is something. But we constantly see the things that irks us or the things we want to change, and it triggers us because we have such of an influx of all that information coming in. And then again, living in a state of burnout, having to work 7 days a week, all these different things. I would like to address that. And who do we call? I know we are strong people and we are strong women, but who do you call as a strong person to reach out to? So this is what I would like to work in mental health, climate change, and also helping people process the traumas associated with natural disasters. Because I saw that in my island as well. After Hurricane Maria, alcohol consumption went up. Domestic violence went up. There's a lot of different things that went up. And I know I can trace it back to people looking for a way to express themselves, for freedom to just not think of their problems. But if you have proper avenue where people can release, an environment where people can release, then that makes at least creating sustainable approaches much easier. Getting your grandmother to realize, okay, it's very good to compost. Teach your children how to do that, the grandchildren how to do that. So as I say, for me, I believe in education. And once you educate persons and you meet them on their level, a human level, then guess what? You can start seeing changes. So that's what it is for me.
Great, thank you so much, Nicole. On that note, I would like to go take a rest myself. I want to say thank you so much. By the way, it was not intentional that it's all women on the panel. I asked who had something to say about the questions I had, and I picked them, but there have been very important men. I mentioned my longtime friend, Alex, and I have been friends for 20 years, and he's the reason I haven't quit yet, Alex Gill. There are a lot of men who have been involved in my father deals everything for us at the office and everything else. So there have been, but I think it's really important also that there are 4 women here talking about reparative justice and care at the intersection of our education and our culture. I'd like to thank Dean Cohenberg, who's here with us, another Sylvia, who's joining us today, and Dr. Rachel Mosley Wood was here for the most part. She's the head of the Literatures and English department. To my students, you see, I'm the same person all the time, see? I'm happy that they came and this is when I tell them I can't read 5 drafts, this is why I am doing plenty other things. But thanks to everyone online. I saw we had a great community of people joining us online and we were on live stream, I think on Facebook and YouTube. So thanks to everyone who came out. This is the first event of our 10th anniversary. I don't know how many I can pull off, but this was a wonderful start to celebrate 10 years. And I hope you take advantage of all the other opportunities that Create Caribbean has. We have funding. We have an undergraduate program that we're extending for 2024 academic year to undergraduate students level 2 and 3 here at Mona in FHE. Our graduate fellows application is also open. We're taking postgraduate students from FHE and you can talk to the current members for their feedback on their experiences. And we also have the community partners program summer intensive training taking place in May. That's open to agencies, departments. We had the Mona Library participate last year. We also had graduate students participate last year as well, some from Mona. So it's open and we will be sharing all our programs and the applications for those programs and grant opportunities and also the other events and activities we'll be having will be going out. But I want to say thanks so much to our contributors today, Natasha Lightfoot, Nicole Morrison, and Sonia Stanley Nair for having such an amazing conversation with me and helping us to acknowledge and plan for the future for Create Caribbean. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.